No matter what walk of life you are from, hit that subscribe button as we have many more debates coming up, including, as you can see at the bottom right of your screen, debate upon 7. It's going to be amazing. Featuring apostate prophet David Wood, inspiring philosophy Mike Jones, Daniel Hakikich.
Hey all, we are back to streaming again. Let's put this on. Okay, here we go. We're going to try to go through this real fast. Okay. All right, so we're going to go through a brief historical context. I got to tell you about this presentation. These are all pictures I took. Look at that front cover. These are all pictures I took while I was over there. So it's kind of cool. Let me see if I can get the YouTube up. Yes, we've got it. Let me put it in the Discord. Gotta figure out how to link this. So this is a really fun one. Shalom, salam, shanti. Good to see you all. That's peace. Peace to all. So we're going to go through a quick historical context. That's peace in Hebrew, Arabic, and Sanskrit. The evolution of nationalism and the Israel-Hamas conflict. So we're going to go quick really through all of this. Okay. So the land before antiquity, multi-ethnic and multi-religious region. There's a tapestry of ethnic, religious groups coexisting under various empires, Jews, Christians, and Muslims who shared the land. There's been successive empires. This is an important thing to know, as opposed to a modern nation state. And this is the thing that we didn't have modern nation states. We had the age of empires. So this is an interesting, important thing. So these concepts and terms were not exactly existing as we know it now. So we have the Ottoman rule from 1517 to 1917, which had a diverse local Arab population. And then we move into the rise of national movements from the late 1800s to 1917 with Jewish self-determination, which we have the response to European anti-Semitism. And that also then triggers the emergence of Arab nationalism and the impact of imperial decline and the influence of European nationalism. So I'll explain why I'm doing this. I'm trying to build a tapestry of what we're dealing with. We have a lot of stuff of why we are where we're at. And if we had more time, like this is like, you could take a whole class talking about the history of this. So we're just trying to sort of establish what's happening before we kind of get into the depth of what's going on. We basically have these very important dates. 1917, we have the Balfour Declaration. We have the San Remo Conference that formalizes the British Mandate. The escalations of tensions leads to violent riots within Hebron and Safed, which marks the beginning of communal violence between Jews and Arabs. Then we see the Arab Revolt in 1936 that opposes the British rule and Jewish immigration, and that lasts for 3 years, which causes significant casualties on both sides. The UN proposes a partition plan. The Jewish leadership accepts it. The Arab leaders reject it. Which then leads into the 5 Arab nations that invade Israel. So we have 1948. Israel declares independence. This is where we would see, depending on which side you're on, the War of Independence or the Nakba. So this is important to look at this. And as stated before, the Arab states invade. And then you have a refugee crisis that emerges. So this is important because Jordan is a part of this conversation. Jordan, becomes a part of the partitioned land. Then you have Egyptian control, and this impacts on Palestinian nationalism, which then leads to geopolitical tensions. Okay, so this leads to our 1967, our Six-Day War, and this drastically alters the geopolitical landscape. The rise of the PLO. This is important because this is the first organization, which was founded in 1964.
So why am I bringing this up? This is very important because we need to have the history. This is very different than the alternative argumentation that we've seen on the other side. We don't see kind of this elaborate kind of deconstruction of what's going on. The PLO is kind of very fundamental, and it's very interesting that our colleagues didn't really talk about the PLO or Hamas. Hamas got very little mentioning, which is really kind of they needed to kind of really tell us why they were good and why they did what they did. They mostly just took up the time to tell us how bad Israel was, which I don't think is the full depth of the debate. They kind of need to tell us about Hamas, but Jvnior actually tells us a little bit more later on, which I think is important. And I think he's quite honest and accountable, so I want to give him that.
Which we'll see Yasser Arafat and Fatah, as well as Marwan Barghouti. So it begins as a militant organization, then it shifts to diplomacy. Then we see Hamas emerging. Hamas established in 1987 during the first Intifada, which then represents a significant shift in Palestinian resistance movement grounded in Islamist ideology.
The PLO was secular, so that's an important thing to note. The PLO was secular in their resistance in what they were calling resistance, or we'll say in resistance in that in the language that's used. And Hamas's position was very much steeped, I would say, in a Sunni Islamic narrative. This is a thing we have to always be careful. What do we mean by Muslim? Because Muslim can mean many different kinds of things. So it's kind of a not even just Sunni, it's a Muslim Brotherhood position. But we'll talk about that later.
It rejects the existence of Israel and advocates for armed struggle, marking a departure from previous diplomatic approaches. So this is important to look at PLO versus Hamas, that the PLO is secular and has diplomacy politics and is internationally recognized. It does have authoritarian leaning, but we could see on the other there's limited under PLO and it supports elections. Hamas has none of the above. Hamas is not just a resistance movement. Hamas is also a governmental organization. So it has a job that it's supposed to serve the Palestinians. In every space, it has failed. It has not done any governance, but we will look into that later. That is citations for that. I do have two other presentations, but I'm going to hand it off over to AP.
Yeah, so AP wanted to present, so I said, you know what, we're going to make sure. And he does a really good job, as you'll see. But I think I was able to kind of create I think we worked very well together. I established a sort of historical narrative and why we should not trust Hamas as a governance, or even they're not resistance or governance. They are not, neither of them are quite viable. So AP takes it off from here.
Ready for you, AP.
This is a very, very interesting concept. How many minutes do I have, James, right now?
11 and a half minutes.
11 and a half minutes. That's fantastic. So I apologize to everybody. It was me who was late, as always. Who is surprised by that? So I was a little bit late because I got the time zones wrong. However, now I'm finally here. So I'm a little bit To be honest, I'm not disappointed. I expected this very much. But so let's get to a few things here, right? Let me share my screen here. My second screen. Is it on the screen now?
Yes.
Is it now? Yes, wonderful, fantastic. So there is a lot of stuff that the pro-Hamas side has said here that is just completely messed up. And in order to simply demonstrate how unreliable the other side is and how little reading they have done, I want to be charitable, I want to be kind, I want to be, well, whatever it is, but this is a serious topic, and you have the other side coming in with complete nonsense. I would encourage them, Jvnior and Julian, to spend more time studying actual stuff than just simply repeating propaganda points. Now,
so this is actually a really good opening where he is actually showing the charter of Hamas and how vile it is. It's a very vile charter. So
now, there's something very funny to point out here. Jvnior, for example, said, and this is just one example of how unreliable this is. He said that Israel began to use the word Hamas, although Hamas simply stands for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, which would normally be Hamai, but Hamas is a bad word in Hebrew, which is why Israel chose this word.
But Hamas is
that's complete
word
nonsense.
In Arabic.
Here's the Hamas charter from 1988. It was Hamas themselves who chose the acronym Hamas for themselves. They chose their name. They put it out to you. You can just search for this yourself. You can search Hamas Covenant 1988. You will even find here, if you search for it, this covenant of the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas. You will find this exactly like this, abbreviated in Arabic, and then points out their struggles. Now, there's of course a lot of interesting stuff here, but since we are talking about Hamas specifically, I want to come to my favorite part of the Hamas charter. My favorite part of the Hamas charter here is the following. Here in 1988, Hamas said the following: moreover, if the links have been distant from each other and if obstacles placed by those who are the lackeys of Zionism in the way of the fighters obstructed the continuation of the struggle, the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, aspires to the realization of Allah's promise, no matter how long that should take. And now let's hear what that promise is. The promise is the following. The Prophet, Allah bless him and grant him salvation, has said, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, kill the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, O Muslim, O servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. Only the gargat tree, which is a random tree, evidently a certain kind of tree, as they also point out, would not do that because it is one of the trees of the Jews. This is Hamas. This is what Hamas stands for. Their ultimate goal is the full destruction and elimination and extermination of Jews. The charter further continues. I would encourage anyone who has any interest in this conflict at all to sit down and read through this entire thing. You will be horrified if you actually think that Hamas is a resistance movement. Because what they also say here is that there is no greater pleasure than to kill and die for Allah. Our friends here also presented the typical warped history of things. For example, they made it look like there was this place called Palestine, there was this country called Palestine. This is a very, very popular image, which they themselves did not necessarily represent, but people still use because they think this is accurate. This whole thing never existed. There was never a state called Palestine. This state called Palestine was never invaded by Jews and taken over bit by bit. The history is as follows. Let me start from the very, very beginning. In fact, I did something very cute here. During our last debate, Jvnior accused me of using ChatGPT and using AI, and then I noticed that he was actually using AI. In fact, during his opening speech here, he used directly AI-written sentences, which was also very ironic. So I thought to myself, since I'm being accused of using AI by the guy who uses AI, let me just use AI to create a presentation of the history of the land. So I put in a request to create a presentation of the entire land from the beginning to the end. So Jvnior says that 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, there was Palestine. There was no such thing called Palestine. Palestine did not exist. He says there were Canaanites, all right? Canaanites have nothing to do with Palestine. Canaanites were people in the land who are also the ancestors of the Israelites, of the Hebrew people, and of many others who lived in that land, and from whom many of the cultural aspects of Middle Eastern cultures originate. Palestinians were not around at any point here. There was a group called the Philistines, who were called Philistines because they were invaders, and that's a word for invasion. And they were called Philistines by the Egyptians and by the Israelites and by others.
So this is actually kind of really interesting to kind of look at. We are kind of covering, I think both AP and I work on building a history. We talk about what the history is, and I like that AP really goes deep into, and it's kind of interesting that he kind of, there's a little bit of bad blood, and so he creates an AI presentation, and it's quite good. It is important to understand this because Jvnior does bring up Canaanites, and then kind of conflates and says it's Palestinian. I do think it's important that we understand the space of the nation state versus the age of empires. There weren't Syrians, there weren't Egyptians. We didn't really have these kind of constructs that we have now. It differs quite deeply. So that's important to kind of consider.
They arrived only in this area at around 1200 BC, around the same time that we first see Israel, the word Israel, inscribed on certain tablets. These Philistines were tiny invaders who were only at a little part where Gaza is approximately nowadays. And later, by 700 BC, were never again heard of. According to the Bible, they were defeated until they basically disappeared. That is the entire history of anything that comes close to Palestine. Nobody called it Palestine. Some Greeks, and later on some Romans inspired by Greeks, referred to that region, that coastal region, as Philistia, in reference to that's the place where the Philistines lived, because the Philistines were actually invaders who came across the sea from the Greek places, and they were therefore culturally familiar to the Greeks. It was only, let's actually go further. So we have Rome here. Rome takes over this place. When Rome takes over this place where Jews are living to that day, where it is also called the Kingdom of Israel and later the Kingdom of Judah. When Rome takes over this place, they name the place where Jews live today as the province of Judea or Judea. Only later on, after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, did Rome decide to spite and to suppress Jewish identity, to rename this land, which was the province of Judea, into Syria Palestina. Syria Palestina, based simply on their fascination with Greek and the Greek habit of calling a certain part of that region Philistia, which would translate in Latin to Palestina. So they start calling it Palestina to suppress Jewish identity and to disconnect them from the land. However, Jews still continuously live in this land. At that point, there are no such thing as Palestinians. In fact, there never were such things as Palestinians. There was also never a state called a Palestinian state. Later on, so Jvnior made another claim here. He said that Arabs continuously lived in this land. Yes, Arabs did live in this land. Arabs lived in this land after the 7th century when the Arab Muslims invaded that land and conquered it and took it over. However, there were still no Palestinians. In fact, most Muslims throughout history did not really refer to that place officially as Palestine or Philistine or anything like that. The early Arabs referred to it as Jund Philistine, like military jurisdiction Philistine, because the Romans called it Palestina. That's all. The Ottomans themselves, who ruled that place for the longest time, never officially called that place Philistine. Can you believe it? They never officially called that place Philistine, despite the fact that they were Muslims and Turks. They referred to that place by different names and divided it into different territories. Only the British, when they took that place over from the Ottomans, began referring to that place once again as Palestine, based on the Roman habit of calling it Palestina. And their goal was to establish a homeland for Jews. Jvnior claimed that Jews only came there after the Second World War. That's complete nonsense. Or during the Second World War. That's complete nonsense. After the Second World War.
Yeah, this is completely correct what he's saying. See, I think what AP and I are doing is we're dealing in facts. This is all true. It is a region called Philistia. That doesn't mean that if people want to identify as Palestine now, that's completely, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, the difficulty is like making a historical claim for that. The term that the ancient people would have called it, because we use the Torah as pretty much our historical document, as we would have called it Canaan. Maybe you could say that Israel is the name that comes after Canaan, but you would use that term Canaan. So yeah, it's rough to take that position that it's like ancient and historical. The region would have been called that, I think, is important. And there's a distinction because there weren't nation states, and that's why we try to establish that there weren't nation states. There were empires, so we have to kind of view it through that lens.
World War, or during the Second World War, the amount of Jews who came there as a result of persecution under Nazis were only a minority of Jews who lived there by the year 1948. Jews wanted a land where both sides can live in peace. That never.
And the thing that I would want to say too is that the United States wasn't always called the United States or America. It had, it's a name that came throughout time, and that's okay. The region had a different name before, or different regions within the place, within this area. So it's okay for names to change throughout time and people that take on different identities. It's just, we want to deal with the facts that we have at hand,
Worked out for the Arabs, because the Arabs were led by absolute monsters, by Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who also was an ally of Hitler, and whom Hitler promised the complete extermination of Jews in that land. Israel wanted to coexist with others. Arabs never wanted to coexist with them, because the Arabs were mostly Muslims who believed.
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of a hopeful. I do think there are Arabs that do. Unfortunately, there were ones who didn't. But I'm kind of your eternal optimist. But I do understand from what we've seen that there's difficulty with that. But I do think I have met a lot of Arabs who do want coexistence. Just it's difficult because you have very loud voices who are not as empathetic or compassionate. And I think it's important to uphold empathetic, compassionate voices. So, yeah.
In their prophet Muhammad, who said, "I will expel the Jews and the Christians from the Arabian Peninsula," who said, let there be curse by Allah upon the Jews and the Christians, for they have taken the graves of their apostles as places of worship.
Yeah, I think it's very important in the Muslim community to kind of wrestle with these things. This is difficult. These are difficult things, and it's important to kind of wrestle with it and try to work on empathetic, compassionate perspectives. So, yeah. Sorry. I apologize for that.
Today, the Palestinian Authority, this is directly from the Palestinian Authority from October 20th, 2023, the Palestinian Authority, supposedly secular, still preaches in their mosques this very narration by Muhammad, which is also in the Hamas charter, which says that eventually the time will come when we will exterminate the Jews. They cry victim, but they keep repeating these announcements of extermination again and again and again. Now, pro-Palestine guys like to claim that that there is some genocide going on. I just want to ask a very, very bold question. In fact, I asked this question when I went to Israel, and I talked to one of the former Israeli the IDF spokespeople. I said, "Hey, by every single evidence that we have, these guys want to genocide you. So what would necessarily be wrong with you in instead doing it to them?" The IDF former spokesman said to me, "Well, it's not what we do." And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's a good point. It's not what we do. The issue here is, however, Israel has no stated aim of genociding the Palestinians. Never had. You know who does have a stated aim of genociding the other side? The Palestinians, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority. They have always had it. They have it to.
Yeah, I would definitely say Hamas. I think it's critical from my point of view to separate Palestinians from Hamas. I think Hamas are doing their own thing, and I think many Palestinians are there's many innocent victims who are caught in the middle of this. So I would say that they're the innocent victims, and I think Hamas are abusers and should be aware of that.
This day, only 2 years ago, and Also, prominently in 2018, the major Hamas spokesperson in Arabic in Gaza, Fatih Hamad, said very, very notoriously to the crowds during the peaceful March of Return, he said to them, the time will come when we will cleanse the land. It will come very soon when we will cleanse the land of the filth of the Jews. And then the second goal will be the establishment of the caliphate. That's what he said. In fact, Junior is making faces here. I'll find the video for the rebuttal section and play it for you, and then you can make that face again.
We're close to the end. You
Okay.
finish that sentence.
There's much more to say about the history, but we will get to that in the rebuttal section because it is a disaster from their side.
We're going to jump into the 8-minute rebuttals indeed. Folks, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. We do appreciate your support, and that lets us know that you want more debates on these topics and with these folks. We're going to kick it over to Julian and Junior. You've got 8 minutes, so about 4 minutes per person.
Julian, if you can let me just take over for a bit, because I just want to read article.
Since we still have some more time, I didn't realize. I think I had a lot more commentary the first one, so we'll allow for the first rebuttal, and then when it gets to our second rebuttal, we'll stop for part C.
16 from this this document that was published by Hamas. You can clearly read here, if you guys can all see it. It says, Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Yet, it is the Zionists who constantly...
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, well, we can stop right now for this. Thank you. We can stop right now for this. He's starting early today. Okay. And we will continue the rebuttal later. That's fine. We already did the opening, so we'll start with the rebuttal next time. I think that's good. We'll start with their rebuttal next time. Okay, we'll stop right there. All right, we'll see you in the next one.